BS estimation of how product decisions get made at either people building interfaces or startups. A lot of it is trying to be informed by logic, and that appears to be system data. But what I want to talk about is the people, like the watching of people, one-on-one observation. And the way that industry job titles talk about that a lot of times is either UX research, user experience research, insights, user research. Every company for some reason has a different term for these kind of jobs. But all I think it boils down to is trying to understand behaviors, not opinions. So we're talking about real life usage of technology, not, what do you think of the color blue? So that's, I think, one way to differentiate it. It's not this question. So it's not, I have an idea for sending pets to space, what do you think? It's not that. It's more functional one-on-one research. And not to say that the quant stuff and the data science isn't super important and also part of this, but I'm just focusing for today more on the qualitative side, more on the one-on-one. The other thing that's interesting is the ratio of sort of design research to engineering to actual product design. So at companies, like these sort of startup-y or technology places, you can see there's a whole lot of designers, but there are not that many researchers. Even now Airbnb has 38 or something like that, but compared to even engineers, it's not even close. So you can see where the priorities lie in the sort of industry terms. And the ratio ends up being 1 to 10, 1 to 11, something like that, across those things. And by the way, just a little bit more about my background. I graduated here in '99, and I had sort of one of those make up your own major things from Muir that was a combination of cog-sci, communications, computing in the arts, and sociology. But I've probably spent the most time in cog-sci. I worked in the DCOG HCI lab, and I was just really into the whole thing here, and I had a lot of fun looking back at my old reader, which I still have. And then right after I graduated, I got an internship at a design firm in the Bay Area that was called Clear Inc. And then 1 year after I graduated, they went bankrupt. It was not my fault, I swear. They were 300 people. And at that time, after the sort of first dot-com bubble burst, there wasn't a lot of jobs in SF. Much less anything related to cog-sci. So a friend of mine and I just sort of co-founded this consultancy called Bull Peters. His last name was Peters, my last name was Bull. There wasn't a lot of fanfare. We weren't we want to be entrepreneurs. It wasn't like that at all. We were just we're unemployed. And, it was just we sort of had met a couple companies. We had met people from Oracle design team and people from Restoration Hardware design team. And they were hey, we liked your guys' research. It helps us build better products. Can you still do this? Even though that agency, Clear Inc., doesn't exist. So we started doing it, and we ended up running it for 10 years, and then, like they mentioned, sold it to Facebook in 2012. And so that, for me, was kind of moving from doing this on the outside, working with a lot of different companies, to doing it in-house on a product team. And I did that for 2 or 3 years, got a chance to write this book during that, and then started this company maybe 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. So this is all sort of to say, let's talk about some more stories. Does anybody recognize this? I'm 2 for 2? That's awesome. Okay, so this is a food assistance card. It's something that helps 46 million Americans get food, buy groceries, and it's basically like a credit card that only works for certain items. I was totally blown away when, the federal government and a nonprofit called Code for America started using our software to try and improve this, to try and improve the experience of getting food assistance. Now, does anybody have a guess what the top... Well, first of all, let's start here. Does anybody have a guess for the percentage of people that receive food stamps, food assistance in America that are employed full-time? So what percentage of people that get help from the government have a full-time job? Any, just yell out a guess. 4.
2.
2.
30.
12, 30. Okay, those are all super good, and those are all exactly what I was going to guess. And it turns out it's 80. Anybody have a guess for what the most common profession is amongst that 80%? So in the group that's employed, yeah.
Teachers.
Yeah, exactly, teachers. Which is crazy. That's such a nuts thing to think about. So now, if you think about teachers, and you think about teachers with families, the period of time when they most need help feeding their families, feeding themselves, is the summer, because a lot of them don't get paid over the summer. Now, how long do you guys think it takes to apply for food assistance? Any guesses?
A month.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate, actually. So 53 days, a little more. So almost 2 months. And it takes at least 90 minutes to go through the online application. Can any of you think of anything you do online that takes 90 minutes? Like, I can't. I mean, that's crazy. Like, if you applied for like a credit card and it took 90 minutes, you'd be like, hell no. You know, I mean, that's a long time to just click through forms and enter information. Even when you do like your taxes online, it probably doesn't take 90 minutes. So essentially, it's very difficult. And most people end up going into one of the pre-scheduled sort of in-person application days that you can do like once a month, but it still takes 53 days. So there's a startup in San Francisco called, or not startup, nonprofit called Code for America. Yeah, that's what you guys know. That does really good work. And there was a guy who worked there named Jacob Solomon, who was on their Health and Human Services team. And he was just looking at this application process for food stamps, the interface, the bureaucracy, everything. And he was like, man, regardless of what your thought is on the role of government in providing food assistance, there's nothing in the current mandate that says we should do a terrible job of that. You know, that's not the goal. Like, there's no reason to have this sort of inefficiency. So I'll let him describe a little bit about how they got started.
She's living in San Francisco. She has 2 part-time jobs, and she goes to the grocery store on the 1st of every month, when her food stamps benefits come in. So a couple of weeks ago, her and her 2 kids got on the bus. They went to the store. They walked through the aisles, filling up their cart. They waited in the long checkout line. They waited for the cashier to scan each of their items. And then Amelia went to pay with her food stamps card, and it was denied. So she tried again, and it was denied again. And then she dug into her purse looking for cash, but this month she didn't have enough. And the people behind her in line were getting a little impatient. So she left her groceries on the counter, gathered up her 2 kids, ushered them out of the store, back on the bus, back home without any food. Imagine how Amelia must have felt. So we think this happens about 1,000 times a month in San Francisco, and we're going to tell you the story of why this happens and what we're doing to prevent it. So about 10 days before Amelia went to the grocery store, she got this letter in the mail. It's called a Notice of Action. It's a federally mandated letter basically telling her that something is going to change with her case. But the problem with this letter is that it's really freaking confusing, and it's intimidating, and most people who see this don't really know what to do. And Amelia didn't know what to do, so she set it aside and did nothing. And by the time she figured out what this letter was trying to say, she had already lost 3 weeks of benefits. So from the agency's perspective, this is known as churn, is when somebody needlessly falls off and comes right back on a program. And churn it's a waste for everybody. It's an unexpected shock for clients, and it's a big waste of resources for the agency. So what are we going to do about this? What would the ideal experience be for clients? So to answer that question, we interviewed staff, and we talked to clients, and we visited nonprofits, and we chatted with eligibility workers, and we even applied for and enrolled in these services ourselves. And we learned that the ideal client experience would be direct, it would be empathetic, and it would meet clients where they are. So we decided to redesign the notice of action from this to this. Let's just send clients a simple text message before they lose their benefits. No more bad shock in the grocery store, no more needlessly going without benefits, and no more angry phone calls coming into HSA.
Okay, so this is definitely cognitive science. You know, what he's saying is here's a system, it includes notifications, it includes messages in the mail, a written letter, and he's saying, look, there's a better way to communicate this information that fits the needs of people's lives better. It seems like a no-brainer. I mean, if you guys are watching, the first time I saw this, I'm like, why wouldn't they just text? You know, it seems so much simpler than sending this cryptic kind of letter that doesn't tell anybody anything. But this notification process is obviously steeped in a lot of system requirements. And if any of you have already been taking cognitive science classes, you know that the system, design often trumps the human needs of that system. So it's kind of, I think it's a great example of how there's this experience that affects a lot of Americans, 1 in 5 households, and it's just not designed around the needs of the people using it. To me, that was one of the principles of CogSci that I first took in the sort of HCI side of things that just blew my mind. I was like, oh, I never thought about that. And these guys set out to do a lot of research. So let's look at what they saw in terms of the actual interface. So this is still the current, for California, and each county has a different way of doing it, but in the state of California, this is still how you would apply for food assistance, and it's called My Benefits Cal-Win. And this is actually the application button. View my benefits. Like, would anybody think to click on that? I wouldn't. Then, see that? That's the second place you can click on this whole page, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Then it takes you here where you sort of, go through a kind of more standard flow. You have to get started here. You're entering a password. By the way, how many people do you think make their password sample123? Then you go here, so then they send it via plain text, which is super secure. Then they have this super bizarre thing, sign-in picture, I don't know what that's about. Then you're, congratulations, okay, well, did we finish? Nope. So then we keep going here, this yellow text, then you hit apply again, now you continue again. What is that? Then we're here. Now they need your social after you're already done. Now look at this. It's crazy. So, you know, I mean, let's just, okay, all right. So, you know, let's, you get the idea. So, what they did is they decided to intercept people in the moment, so they used our little sort of web intercept to do that. And they basically just said, hey, you know, talk to us. Take 10 minutes out of your day and, you know, fill out this little form that will let you participate in an interview with a Code for America researcher. Now, they had some ways of honing down who they talked to, but this is the inside of Ethne, our little like ethnography to go thing. And they just called these people. And they did phone interviews, and some of them who were able to have like a laptop had did screen sharing. So they just showed people, yeah, this is what I'm trying to do, and I don't understand it. And the Code for America people, they didn't do a lot of this. They probably did, you know, similar scope to what you guys might do in a class here, you know, 10, 15 interviews. It's really similar to this concept of like, it's not a huge sample, we're not talking quant, we're just talking qual. And, you know, they also mixed that in with the data they had, so they obviously had a lot of data. And they produced this app, this prototype, that they've now been, and this is what Code for America does, pitching to local and state governments to implement. And this is the application. First of all, it works on mobile, which that other site doesn't even work on your phone. And a giant percentage of people that have smartphones don't have home computers. So it's kind of what you would expect. You know, it's a modern experience for applying for food stamps. And they got this down from 90 minutes to 11 minutes, which is pretty awesome. Now, they can't yet mess with the 53-day part because that's all behind the scenes. That's what the government needs to process the application. But I just think it's an awesome kind of example of the potential for design research to really result in social good. You know, there's a lot of uses of it, but for me, it's just that kind of, you know, part of our functioning democracy that works better because these people did 30 interviews, which is sort of crazy to me. So here's another one. This guy's Malcolm Gladwell, who I'm sure a bunch of you know. And he has this story called the Dead Tomato Society. Is anybody familiar with this one? One person, okay. So this is basically a researcher in, I think, 1986. And his name was Howard Moskowitz. And he decided to take, instead of doing those focus groups we were looking at, which was in food services in 1986, the way that you would conduct research, he stuck a bunch of people in a room, hungry people, and he said, why don't we just come up with 40 variants of tomato sauce to see what people like better, and we'll chart each variant of tomato sauce. Now in 1986, if you walked into a grocery store, here's something you would not find on the aisle, and that is extra chunky tomato sauce. It did not exist. If you wanted authentic tomato sauce, it was like runny marinara, basically. And from these studies, this guy, Howard Moskowitz, realized that when people ate 40 different varietals of tomato sauce and they all liked the extra chunky, he was like, Prego, and Prego's the one who hired them, he said, yo, Prego, make this type of sauce. And I think Prego made $36 million in the first year. They made extra chunky tomato sauce. So, you know, it used to be, they just asked people, what kind of tomato sauce do you like? And then they went back and tried to come up with a product. And now you guys might be thinking, what does this have to do with cognitive science? But it's behavioral research. And it really helped, if you've ever walked into a grocery store like I had and looked at like a giant rack of tomato sauce and been like, oh my God, why is there so much choice here? It also, I think, led to this like hyper-individualizing of products. So I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that type of behavioral research is very functional, and it was very rare. So here's another one, just a couple years later in 1988. This was the USS Vincennes, and it was one of the first deployed instances of this new type of radar called Aegis class radar. And it was a brand new, pretty complicated interface for 1988. And you had, you know, a lot of work in the military, as probably most of you know, is like directly sort of the creation, inception of cognitive science, and a lot of the practices that we learn comes from military and space, all these interesting technologies. But in this case, they didn't do as much research as they could have with the actual use of the interface. So it's debatable what happened on this ship, but what a lot of people say happened is they had some blips on the radar screen that appeared to be descending, one blip in particular. And they were looking at the blip and they were trying to interpret it, and it's a new interface. And the guy that was operating the radar brought over the commander of the ship, and the commander of the ship was like, that does look like the blip is descending on us. And if you can imagine, and they were deployed in, I think, the Middle East somewhere, like in a bay that was sort of, tense. So they saw the blip, they saw it was descending, and they decided that it was a threat to the ship, so they launched a missile. And the missile ended up shooting down a civilian airliner on July 3rd, 1988, which killed 260 people. And it was a huge tragedy. And there's a lot of debate around like what exactly led to the missile being fired, but a lot of people recognize there's some core facts. It was a brand new interface, it was deployed to a target audience that didn't have much training using it, and it was a stressful environment. So, in a lot of ways, this kind of application of CogSci, of design research, leads to life and death scenarios. I mean, it's an extreme and tragic example, but I think it highlights the more these sort of technology systems get deployed, the more we have to understand them. I would say about 11 years ago, a bunch of researchers at Twitter had like one design researcher a long time ago, and they noticed that people were using different kinds of syntax in the early versions of Twitter. The @ symbols, which you guys know, and the hashtag. And it was kind of a new thing, it wasn't Twitter that came up with that and said like, hey everybody, use the hashtag. Instead they noticed that people were sort of like using it a lot, and they decided to incorporate it into the system. And then we ended up with, what I would say now is almost part of our culture. It's like, this is just something that's even a joke at this point. But it led to a big sort of change, and I think all that came from literally researchers sitting in a room trying to understand the design. So that's Ev Williams, one of the co-founders, and this is a guy, Kevin Chang, and they're just sitting there, and another researcher here, Maya, they're just trying to understand system behavior, looking at data, looking at one-on-one interviews. They went around the country doing in-home research and applying some of the same principles. And, this is where you could sort of argue that understanding human behavior isn't official research. Not everybody on this team was officially a researcher, but they were all using a lot of the principles that you guys study. So, I think we can call a hashtag a cultural shift, I guess. And then another one is this sort of big surprise to me, and that's when I got to Facebook. I think of Facebook as like a relentlessly logical company, sort of like Google, an engineering-driven company, a company that has a lot of data, uses that data to make decisions. But I was really surprised that this was like one of the official posters of the research team there. And their goal was to bring a little empathy to the engineering and design processes. Most of the Facebook users, the vast majority, are not even in the United States now. And even within the United States, most of Facebook users don't have the kind of like data and technology that most of us have, let alone the engineers that work at Facebook. So one of the missions for the Facebook research team is to bring the experiences that most people have to the people building and designing the tools. And I didn't have a ton of like interactions with Uncle Mark, but I did get to sit down with him a couple times. And I was also really surprised that he thought qualitative research, just like the kind of stuff you guys are studying here, has a role in the sort of as big of a company as Facebook. And he also said this, which I thought was crazy, that he really believes in understanding the context of usage of products. It might not always feel like it might not always seem like that, but they, the way they divvy up the types of like research and design there really surprised me. One of the things they do is send teams of researchers all around the world all the time and work on these tiny, tiny little issues. One of them is if you ever swipe on the cover photo on mobile, either the app or like mobile web, you'll notice that it actually shows you other information about the person who you're looking at, whether they're a friend or not. That didn't used to exist. And in data, they kept seeing touch behaviors on that cover photo. And cover photos weren't that old. That's what's basically in the black area here. But they were like, what is going on? This doesn't make any sense. Why would people be swiping on this object in the interface that doesn't do anything? But what they sort of realized by sending people all around the world is that that's just a way people expected to try and dive down. I bet almost none of you here, and including me, would ever realize you're doing that. But they just switched it around so that it did what you sort of would expect it to do. And now if you swipe, it'll give you more information about the person. So it was kind of like, it's still a relentlessly logical company. They still run a trillion billion experiments on all of us at all times. But they also do qualitative stuff. That was surprising to me. And the speed at which they conduct these one-on-one sort of human studies also really surprised me. So I think it's another sort of example of how this sort of cog-sci stuff can lead to these incrementally better experiences. Another aspect of this stuff is the flashlight on cell phones, which in like 1998, there was all these Wall Street Journal and New York Times articles about how this researcher named Jan Chipchase went to tiny villages around the world where they didn't necessarily have cell phones or even much technology at all at the time, and he sat down with people to sketch out this vision of like what a phone would do. And the story goes, he did these collaborative design